Welcome to episode 80 of I Thought I Knew How, a podcast about knitting and life and all sorts. I'm your host, Anne Frost, and this episode was recorded on March 29th, 2022. Today we are going to talk about cotton. Cotton is a fairly controversial fiber. People tend to have strong opinions about it. We are going to delve into why that is, as well as learning about how it's grown and spun and best used by fiber artists. This is the last episode of Season 6, so I would like to take a moment and thank all of my patrons and everyone who has left 5-star ratings and kind comments where you download the podcast. Your support keeps the podcast going forward through both financial and social support, and I continue to be so grateful to all the ways folks support this little endeavor of mine. I am recording this episode a few weeks early because I'm heading off on a trip, and this episode is meant to come out on the night we will be on a plane heading home. I'm hoping to get a few interviews while I'm away to share with you as Season 7 launches in June. But for now, we're going to wrap up Season 6 with another deep dive into a specific fiber. Spring is fully here in Connecticut, so I'm thinking about summer knitting. And while you know me, I'm very likely to keep going with my wool anyway. I do tend to think my way through some cotton projects in the spring, whether or not I actually cast them on. Like linen, the last fiber we investigated, cotton is a cellulose fiber. Different ancient civilizations based in dry climates seem to have domesticated cotton independently of one another. And archaeologists really have no idea which civilization was first. The evidence of early cotton use by humans is all in the form of grave goods, so it's just a matter of what hasn't rotted. Currently, the oldest cotton fabric we know of was found in Peru, and it's about 8,000 years old. There's also physical evidence of cotton in use in both eastern Sudan and the eastern part of the Indian subcontinent from about 7,000 years ago. The word cotton comes from the Arabic, which makes sense because while cotton was widely used in India, China, and South America, most of Europe didn't really use it until after the Muslims began to conquer areas of Spain in the 700s. From there, it spread slowly around Europe. Its slow progress through Europe can easily be understood when you remember that both wool and linen were well-established fibers that didn't need to be imported. India had been exporting cotton fabrics throughout Asia for centuries before it caught on as a popular cloth in Europe. It wasn't until the late 1600s that cotton really caught on in Europe as the Europeans themselves began trading directly with cotton manufacturers as a result of exploration and eventually colonization. Cotton fabric was comparably inexpensive and it could easily be printed with designs, so it quickly became a popular fabric and became a threat to local fabric production, specifically in the UK, which went as far as banning the import of cotton fabric for a time. So, enterprising Brits turned to importing raw cotton and processing it locally. In fact, the weaving of cotton fabric was one of the major driving forces of the overall Industrial Revolution. Many Americans have the impression that colonists settled in the South and began growing cotton immediately. Cotton was first grown in one of the East Coast colonies in the mid-1500s in Spanish-owned Florida. It's important to remember, though, that the native North American, Central, South American people had been growing it as far north as into Arizona before that point. We're just talking about colonial growing. Colonists in other areas were growing it at a small scale, but cotton was extremely labor intensive as it not only needed to be picked by hand, but then each cotton boll, spelled B-O-L-L, the fluffy bit of the cotton produced by the cotton plant, needed to have the seeds manually removed. Tobacco and sugar remained the major crops in the South until the late 1700s, when a hand-cranked cotton gin was patented by Eli Whitney. Cotton gins had existed for centuries by this point. There's cave art in India depicting the use of one, and they were widely used in India by the 16th century. Some had even been water-powered. Those cotton gins in India were more suitable for long staple cotton, though. The machine developed by Whitney could work with the short staple varieties that were being grown in the U.S. When the cotton mill made cotton processing easier, cotton became much more profitable and more land was given over to its cultivation. the use of enslaved Africans increased proportionally. Before the cotton gin, American colonies were producing about 2 million pounds of cotton a year. After, they were producing 48.5 million pounds, and fully half of the populations of Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana were enslaved Africans and people of African descent. Now, cotton mills are mostly located in Bangladesh, China, Latin America, and India. And there are many controversies surrounding the growth and processing of cotton even today. Cotton grows best in dry areas, but it also requires a lot of water to bring about full yield. Cotton crops are susceptible to insects, which means they require a great deal of pesticides. And scientists work constantly to come up with strains that are naturally resistant to certain insects, upsetting some who object to genetic engineering. There are credible allegations that working conditions in cotton mills continue to be extremely poor, to put it mildly. Cotton is such a major part of life throughout the world that it's hard to think of alternatives to give it up entirely. Fair Trade International has a certification program that growers can go through that requires them to live up to certain health and safety levels and engage in farming practices with less harmful environmental practices. I will put a link in the show notes where you can learn more about the Fair Trade label for cotton. Unfortunately, there are so many buzzwords that can be used in marketing that it's hard to know when to trust that claims that yarn is fair trade or even organic means what you think it means. Fairtrade.net has a way to find people who are producing cotton and yarn that has been certified, but none of them sell under their own label, or at least not that I can see. These fair trade yarn manufacturers on the fair trade site could be producing knitting yarn, or they could be producing yarn for use in weaving. Katia Yarn has a fair cotton line that's a fair trade product. If you know of one of the major brands, please let me know. In the meantime, you can look for yarn grown and processed in countries with worker protections in place. Don't be afraid to send an email to a yarn producer and ask where their cotton comes from and where it's milled. We're going to pause here for a minute and have a song break. When we're back together, we're going to move on from the history of cotton and talk about the fiber itself. Since this is the season ender, let's look back at a couple of songs from earlier in the season. First, let's have a second listen to The Myth of Translation. We first heard this song back in episode 71, which was the season opener. But at that point, I couldn't credit the artist. Now I can say that this beautiful song is by Ben Bostic. Enjoy.
If you say what you mean, and I listen close, then I'll know what you mean. So the theory goes. But here in the real world, it don't work that way. You claim I don't hear anything you say. The myth of translation says words can convey intentions and meaning from your heart to my brain. Miscommunication has plainly been framed. The myth of translation is clearly to blame. We feed our children all flavors of lies, sweet deceptions to mask the taste of life. We teach them to listen, we sing or speak your mind. They grow up and leave us, and we wonder why. Ooh, the myth of translation says words can convey intentions and meaning from my heart to your brain. Miscommunication has plainly been framed. The myth of translation is clearly to blame. out of Babel was worse than reported. The editors knew that we couldn't have borne it. When hearts draw near and wish to relate, precious messages are shared, but they do not translate. The myth of translation, since words can convey intentions and meaning from my heart to your brain. Miscommunication has plainly been framed. The myth of translation is really to blame.
Years ago, I learned how to reclaim yarn from sweaters bought at thrift stores, and in so doing, I learned an interesting thing about how clothing manufacturers work with cotton and plant fibers in general. I had picked up a few cotton sweaters for a few dollars each to take apart and repurpose the yarn, and as I did so, I realized that the yarn that had been used to knit the sweaters wasn't actually plied together. Industrial spun cotton is spun into thin singles. And then when a sweater manufacturer wants to knit something, they will connect up as many spools of those singles as they need to a knitting machine to create the thickness of yarn that they need. But the singles are never actually plied together. Many cotton yarns for crafters are made up of a group of fine singles that have been plied together, but not all. It is possible to spin cotton differently than just as a fine single. You will often see a very thick single plied with a thin one that will create a loftier cotton with a sort of protective structure provided by the thinner ply. But the cotton can also be spun into singles that are slubbier in appearance themselves. It's also common to see loftier, thicker singles spun together to form a worsted or bulky cotton. Cotton is very inelastic. It's made up of cellulose molecules held together with hydrogen bonds. Hydrogen bonds aren't super strong to begin with, but the cellulose molecules of cotton are also randomly aligned, which makes them weaker than they could theoretically be. When it's wet, cotton is actually 20% stronger than when it's dry, but cotton can only stretch about 8% before it just breaks. Weaving or knitting it will typically prevent it from being able to stretch that far, though, so you really don't need to worry about your sweater sleeve snapping apart if someone jerks on it. And the structure of knitted fabric will allow the fabric itself to be more flexible than a woven cotton fabric. Cotton is spun under slight tension, which is one of the reasons why cotton clothing tends to shrink when it's washed. The same can happen with our knitted items made from cotton. In fact, it's fairly common for something that's been knit in cotton to shrink shorter and wider once it's been knit and then washed. It's very important that you swatch cotton projects and take careful before and after measurements so that you can plan accordingly. I used to knit dishcloths. Did anyone else knit dishcloths in the early 2000s? There were online groups, monthly knit-alongs, things like that. In fact, I used to host a monthly knit-along. I did that for about almost a year, I think, where, they'd give you 8 lines a day and then you would knit a dishcloth and you wouldn't know what it would look like until the week was up. Anyway, it used to bug me so much when I would knit a square dishcloth and then after my first wash, it would be a rectangle. And so I started knitting it about 15% longer, 10 to 15% longer than the width. And then when it would shrink up to square. So it's very important if you are knitting with cotton, you really do need to go through the entire swatching process of knitting it, measuring it, washing it, and then drying it as you are going to drying it flat and, pulling it in place before you leave it to dry can help mitigate some of that effect. Putting it in a dryer, you are going to get maximum shortening. So just keep that in mind. I also remember when I was in high school, do you remember those like preppy V-neck cotton sweaters from the Gap that were very, very, very in style in the sort of mid to late 90s? I feel like they were like cable knit in a natural white cotton, and then they had like colored stripes around all of the openings, like the neck, the bottom, the wrists. At the start of term, kids would have these nicely fitting new sweaters. And by about Halloween time, they would all be shorter and wider, like just a little cropped and baggier. But it sort of happened to everyone's sweater. So then like that became the style. Anyway, it's funny. I look back on that and think, I noticed it at the time, not as a knitter. And now I know why that happened. Anyway, again, you might want to knit your cotton projects a little longer and a little narrower to accommodate for how cotton behaves. The good news is that after a wash or two, cotton does tend to stop shrinking. Pima, Egyptian, and Sea Island cottons are all longer staple cottons, so they tend to hold up better under use. Mercerized cotton behaves completely differently from unmercerized cotton. Mercerization makes cotton stronger, shinier, better at taking dye, and it prevents it from shrinking. The process is pretty straightforward. The yarn is put under tension, it's submerged in a lye bath, and that's pretty much it. The process smooths the outer layers of the fiber, which makes it shinier. It also shrinks or tightens the fiber, so mercerized cotton does not shrink when it's washed, but it's also less absorbent. The arrangements of the molecules in cotton is what makes it a very absorbent fiber. Mercerization will make cotton more slow to absorb, though. When you are planning your projects for anything you want to be absorbent, like items for your kitchen or face cloths or certain baby items, you want to stick to a cotton that looks dull in the light because it hasn't been mercerized and it will be quicker to absorb. Mercerized cotton is a better choice for clothing that you don't want to be absorbent because here's the thing about cotton. It likes to absorb moisture and hold on to it. The spaces between the cellulose fibers act like wicks. It will suck up the moisture quickly and be reluctant to let it go. This also makes those areas a breeding ground for bacteria, which means cotton can be a stinkier option to knit with too. And airing them out between wears will do very little to get rid of that funk. Cotton just needs to be laundered more often, if not after every wear. That said, if you can put off washing cotton items, do, especially if it's not mercerized cotton, because again, cotton is not a super strong fiber, so a heavy washing schedule will wear it out faster. 4 local yarn shops in New York and Pennsylvania are planning the Twin Tiers Yarn Crawl on Saturday, April 30th. Participating shops are Blossberg Company Store, Fiber Arts in the Glen, Rabbit Row Yarns and Haberdashery, and Woolly Minded. Each shop is offering unique promotions, meet and greets, as well as exclusive fiber products for the festivities. Whether you are a lifelong maker or turn to fiber arts as your pandemic panacea, grab some friends and get to the Twin Tiers Yarn Crawl. You can find more information at rabbitrowyarns.com. As you are making your summer plans, be sure to ink in a trip to Knit New Haven. Just a short trip out of New York City, Knit New Haven is located in New Haven, Connecticut, home to world-class art and history museums, as well as incredible pizza. Look, I love New York as much as the next person, but the summer gets hot in the city. There are even songs about it. Plan your trip, see your sights, but give yourself a break to cool down by spending a day in New Haven and make Knit New Haven high on your list to visit. They have curated an incredible selection of yarns, as well as stocking the most popular publications and all those little bits and pieces you need to finish your project properly. Find out more about the shop at knitnewhaven.com. The Morehouse Merino flock does not slow down for summer. It's a perfect time to join the flock group with projects already available for you, your loved ones, and your home, already waiting in the lessons area of the flock with all the help you need, plus more on the way all through the summer. Each knit along comes with videos and blog posts to get you through without panicking. Plus, Erin hosts open hours where you can hop in and chat with your fellow knitters and get help for any project you need, whether it's a flock knit along or not. All of this for less than the price of one typical online class. Learn more at morehousemerinoflock.com. Many thanks to all my sponsors and to you for taking the time to support them. So you found your project. You chose the appropriate type of cotton for it, and it's all knitted up. How do you care for a knit cotton project? Some people are going to say, fear not, you can just throw it in your washer and dryer, and others are going to opt for the other extreme and say you should follow the same steps as cleaning and blocking a wool sweater. For longevity and best results, I think the answer can be found somewhere in the middle. Can you wash it in your washing machine? I'm going to go ahead and say yes. I couldn't find anyone anywhere who suggested hand washing other than on the blog of this one lady who seems to just want to hand wash everything because she wants it to last long enough for her great-grandchildren to wear it too. As I mentioned earlier in this episode, cotton is actually stronger when it's wet, so you don't need to fear the fibers becoming badly damaged in the machine. Agitation can be a bit problematic. I would still strongly suggest that you put a knit garment into a garment bag before washing, especially for cotton. I've had nightmarish results in the past with top-loading machines and cotton sweaters where one sleeve ended up lying in a different direction from the rest of the sweater for the spin cycle, and that one sleeve grew like 6 inches longer than the other sleeve as a result. Keeping your knits in a garment bag will allow the water and detergent in. It will minimize abrasion, and it will keep the garment from getting weirdly stretched out. Another thing to keep in mind is that cotton will take a dye well, but it also will release excess dyes during the first few washes. So if your cotton yarn hasn't been pre-washed, this is another reason why you want to swatch with cotton. You want to make sure that it's not going to run very badly when the time comes. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing if the garment is all one color, but if you're using multiple colors of cotton, that can be a problem. So always, always, always wash your swatch, especially with cotton, to check for color fastness. It's not a deal breaker. Just know that the first few times that you wash something that you have knit with cotton, you really should probably either wash it separately or wash it with things that are the same color in case there is some dye transfer. Now, at this point in the process of laundering our cotton knits, this is where we meet controversy. I do not dry my cotton sweaters in the dryer, nor do I dry them flat on a towel like I would with a wool sweater. The high heat of the dryer can cause damage to the cotton fibers over time. And because cotton loves water so much, laying a sweater out on a flat surface to dry means that the side in contact with the surface is going to stay wet longer. Now, if I'm washing like face cloths or dishwashing cloths or something like that, those will go in a dryer. I'm not worried about those. I'm talking about cotton clothing items. I dry our cotton sweaters on a mesh drying rack. This allows airflow underneath the sweater as well as on top. As I lay out the sweater, I make sure it is in proper shape, and I smooth out any wrinkle I can see as best I can. Cotton will hold wrinkles like a miser holding on to his last penny. When they are about halfway dry, I will go in and flip them over, again making sure that they are all in the proper shape and smoothing out any wrinkles I see. Remember that cotton will often shrink up and outward, so don't feel shy about tugging the clothing back into position while it's still wet. If you can, dry it with a fan on in the room so the air circulation is better, or if you have a dehumidifier, that would be even better. Cotton really is reluctant to let go of water, and if your ambient humidity is high enough where you live, your cotton knits can start to get stinky again before they're actually dry. When it's totally dry, if there are still some wrinkles, I will turn the sweater inside out and iron it very gently with high steam and low pressure. You want the steam to do the work, not the weight of the iron, because that can singe the cotton. And using the weight of the iron on cotton yarn can create a flat surface to the stitches. So you lose the look of the roundness of the yarn on the surface of the knit item, if that makes sense. So the surface of the stitches look very flat, but then between the stitches, you still have the roundness of the yarn. It's a really weird effect. So if you're going to use an iron on your cotton knits, again, turn it inside out and just barely skim the surface of the knits with your iron so that the steam is what is doing the work. You do need to protect your cotton sweaters from moths just like you would protect your wool ones. Say it with me, folks. Moths are attracted to the smell of you and other mammals. Okay, so you never want to put your cotton sweaters away dirty or after having been worn, because the smell of you on a cotton sweater will attract a moth just as a wool sweater will attract a moth. Also, different insects like different things. So you might not end up with moths in your cotton, but silverfish, termites, and other insects might like munching on your cotton sweaters. Even crickets can damage cotton. They're not there for the cotton itself. They're attracted to the stuff you leave behind on your cotton sweaters, like little food crumbs or, again, the smell of you. And they might damage the fibers as they eat what they find in the sweater. Never, ever, ever, saying it again, store your cotton sweaters long-term without washing them first to get your smell and skin and bits of food and whatever off of them. And then store them in well-lit areas, behind a barrier, and with lots of plant-based smelly things like cedar or lavender or spice blends in sachets. Finally, fold your cotton sweaters. Do not hang them. Any cotton sweater that has any sort of weight to it will stretch under that weight. Sometimes it's so bad, you'll see cotton sweaters hanging in stores and they're already stretched out of shape completely hanging on the hanger. I just stand back and wonder how no one is apparently seeing the damage they're doing to the unsold clothing in their shops. But okay, sometimes management and corporate decision makers make bad decisions. So you always want to make sure that you fold your cotton sweaters, store them on a shelf. If you need to, if you don't have the space, you can sort of fold them along the midline and drape them over a hanger. I still don't necessarily recommend that. I still recommend that you just go ahead and fold it and make shelf space for them. I have another throwback song, and then I have some information for you about a very special yarn box I'm putting together for December this year. In the meantime, here's a song from episode 76. When I look for music to feature, I end up listening to maybe a dozen songs for every one that I actually use. And when I found this one, I put it on a loop and listened to it for like an hour. It took me back to those late 90s college years, and I love it. This is Not All from Humans Win.
Innocent as a dove for something else sees, clinging to her, willing to forgive or not, grasping for something, hope
A few more things before I go. By now, I think everyone is familiar with the model of the Advent yarn box. There are Christmas-themed boxes, Hanukkah-themed boxes, New Year's-themed boxes. Each day of the box, you have something to open and enjoy. This last year, Jana Knits and I did a hand-dyed December vlog series on her YouTube channel where we each opened a few of these types of boxes through the month, and it got me thinking. How wonderful would it be to have a 31-day box spotlighting the yarn producers of Shetland? So I started reaching out to some of them, and I actually had to stop asking before I got to everyone because everyone I approached answered with an enthusiastic yes. Scotland's New Year tradition is called Hogmanay, and so I've decided to call the box the Shetland Hogmanay Yarn Box. It will contain 31 packages for you to open daily through all of December leading up to New Year's Eve. All the contributions to the box will be from 7 different Shetland-based wool producers and also includes gifts from Shetland craftspeople. I have asked designers from the area to contribute their skills to develop a pattern for each yarn producer's contribution to the box, though you are welcome to use the yarn however you wish. So 7 patterns will be included with the box as download codes for you to download free from Ravelry or the designer's website. And the patterns are either true to traditional Shetland knitting styles, or some of them draw on inspiration from elsewhere. All along the way through the month, we will learn a little bit about some of the traditions around the Hogmanay celebrations. There is a generous but limited number of boxes available. Patrons, watch the Patreon feed. You will have first access to order the box for 48 hours. After that, the link to order will be made available on my mailing list, in the Facebook group, on Instagram and Twitter. I do not want to give a set date to order at this point because there are still a few things that need to fall into place. But my goal is to launch pre-orders in the early days of May. So make sure that you are on the mailing list or following I Thought I Knew How on social media before then. I am very excited to be able to offer this box of some of my favorite yarns to listeners, especially since some of them are not typically available from US-based vendors. This is a great opportunity to try a variety of these yarns without having to pay the international postage. That said, if you are listening to this from outside of the US, I am willing to ship internationally if you are willing to deal with the international postage. Keep your eyes out for the pre-orders to go live. I promise I will not be subtle about it when the time comes. Secondly, this is the end of Season 6. I will be back in June with Season 7, which will be split into 2 5-episode sections. The first 5 episodes should all be interviews with folks from around the world who work in fiber in one way or another. After that, I will need to take a break to go on the second batch of tours to Shetland, and then I'll be back for the last 5 episodes of Season 7 that will take us through to the end of the year. In the meantime, while I'm away, you can find me at the Connecticut Sheep Wool and Fiber Festival in North Haven, Connecticut on April 30th. I will be doing something to be determined at the Morehouse Farm booth, as well as wandering around the grounds looking for people to pepper with questions. I will be in Shetland a few days ahead of the tours in mid-May. They will be a busy few days, but if anyone wants to get together, just let me know. Erin and I will be continuing to produce episodes of That Knitting Show over on YouTube, so you can find us both there. And I will still be hosting regular online knitting sessions, both for patrons and for those who are attending the Macking Our Way Through Shetland tours. So I will definitely still be around. Do say hi. Thank you, everyone, for coming along for the ride with me through Season 6. I hope you learned a lot about some of the more popular fibers knitters like to work with. I hope you were inspired by some of the people who came and spoke with us. And I hope you decided to give something new a go, whether it was crochet or lace or a Stephen West pattern or your first knit along. I love and appreciate your feedback and support. I will miss this over the next few months, but I don't want to miss you. Keep in touch, and I'll be back in this format in June. In the meantime, thank you for listening and knitting with me for a bit. If you'd like to support the show, please visit patreon.com/IThoughtIKnewHow to make a monthly pledge. You may also consider making a purchase from one of our sponsors by visiting the website IThoughtIKnewHow.com and clicking the link at the top that says Be a Booster. While you are on this site, you can also find the show notes for each episode. Thank you ever so much to my patrons, to Knit New Haven, to Morehouse Farm, and to the Twin Tiers Yarn Crawl for sponsoring the podcast. Find me on my social media accounts as I Thought I Knew How, except on Twitter, where it's just Thought I Knew How. The groups on various platforms are all called I Thought I Knew How Podcast. Until next time, may you be blessed with stitches that never drop, yarn without joins, and plenty of time to knit. Bye, guys.